I talk to myself. Not in a concerning way. I don't have conversations, I don't argue with invisible people, I don't narrate my dreams. I just comment on things. Out loud. Whatever I'm looking at, whatever I'm doing. That rock formation is wrong for this latitude. The soil's too dark, something burned here recently. That's a weird color for a sky, even by alien standards. My first surveying partner told me it was unsettling. My second told me it was useful, actually, like having a running log that didn't need transcribing. My third didn't say anything because there was no third. I work alone now. The talking hasn't stopped. I was on the eastern ridge of Villain 7 cataloging the mineral formations when I crossed the line. I didn't see a line. That's the thing nobody mentions when they tell this story later, and people do tell this story. I've heard it 3 times at diplomatic functions and it gets worse every time. There was no visible boundary. No markers, no signs, no barrier. One moment I was measuring a rock outcropping and saying out loud, to nobody, "Huh, that's limestone, that shouldn't be limestone at this elevation." And the next moment 400 people in ceremonial dress were staring at me in absolute silence from a valley I hadn't noticed existed. The silence was the worst part. 400 people. Not one sound. I said out loud, because apparently I have no survival instincts. "Oh. That's a lot of witnesses." The silence lasted about 8 seconds. I counted because counting is what I do when I'm frightened and don't want it to show. It gives my brain something to do that isn't panic. Then everyone started talking at once, and I understood approximately none of it because my translation module covers Villain standard dialect, and whatever was happening in this valley was not standard dialect. It was older, more formal, the kind of language that exists in ceremonial contexts, and hasn't been updated since someone decided the ceremony was more important than clarity. I caught fragments, boundary and witness, and a word that appeared repeatedly and that my module flagged as archaic with multiple possible meanings, which is exactly what you want to hear when 400 people are saying it about you. I stood very still. When you don't know what's happening, standing still is usually the least wrong option. I'd learned that on 3 different planets, and it had been correct twice, which I considered a reasonable average. She came from the center of the valley. I noticed the armor first because it caught the light in a way that suggested it was functional rather than decorative. The weight distribution was wrong for purely ceremonial use, the joints reinforced in places that only mattered if you actually moved in it. I noticed this before I noticed her face, which tells you something about my priorities. The crown was integrated into the helmet, not separate, which was interesting from a design perspective and also probably meaningful in ways I didn't have time to analyze. She walked like someone who had never once in her life needed to check whether there was space for her. The crowd divided ahead of her without any visible signal. I said out loud to myself, which in retrospect was the first mistake, "That's the most efficient crowd management I've ever seen." Is that trained or is it just, wait, is she the one running this? The translation module handled that. I know because several people near me turned to look at me with expressions that suggested I had said something notable, and not in a good way. She stopped about 3 meters away. Up close the armor was even more interesting. There were inscriptions along the bracers that I recognized as pre-colonial Villain script, which meant either this was a museum piece or someone in her family had been preserving a writing system that most scholars considered extinct. I was going to say something about this. I was definitely going to say something about this. She began speaking. Formal, measured, the cadence of something memorized and repeated many times. My translation module worked on it slowly, flagging archaic terms, offering multiple options for ambiguous phrases. The gist, as it assembled itself, I had crossed a sacred boundary. The boundary existed to preserve the integrity of the succession ritual. Crossing it was either an act of aggression or an act of profound stupidity. Either way the law was clear. Either way the outcome was. She said a word. My module flagged it immediately. Execution/ending/cessation. Multiple valid translations. All of them pointed in the same direction. I said out loud, Okay, so that's okay. That's one option. She paused. Looked at me directly for the first time. I have a problem, which is that when I'm nervous I talk more, not less. I know this about myself. I have known this about myself for 34 years and I have never successfully corrected it. What I should have done at this moment was say nothing, or possibly apologize, or at minimum wait for the translation module to give me something useful to work with. What I did was look at her standing there in the ceremonial armor with the integrated crown and the pre-colonial script on her bracers and the expression of someone who had already made a decision and was waiting for the formality to catch up, and I said, out loud, to the valley, to no one in particular, God, that is genuinely impressive. I don't mean I mean all of it. The whole. This is the most impressive thing I've seen on this planet, and I've been here 6 weeks. The translation module, unhelpfully, translated all of it. The silence came back. Different quality this time, less alarm, more something I couldn't read. She looked at me. I looked at her. I became aware that the crowd had gone very still again, but in a different way than before. Before it was the stillness of shock, this was the stillness of people waiting for something. Her aide, small, fast-moving, the kind of person who exists in the gap between events and manages them, leaned toward her and said something quietly. She listened without looking away from me. Then she said something short and sharp to the aide. The aide turned to me and said, in standard dialect, "You are aware of what you have said." I said she was impressive. I said, I meant it as it's a compliment. Where I'm from, that's the word you used, the aide said carefully. In the ritual context, before witnesses, during the succession ceremony. He paused. In formal Valain it does not mean impressive in the general sense. It means the one I choose above all others. I looked at him. I'm sorry. It is the ceremonial declaration of intent to bond, he said. It requires a witness count of no fewer than 100. You had 400. I looked at the 400 witnesses. They looked back. I see, I said. And that means the execution, the aide said, with the careful tone of someone who has had to explain complicated things to confused people before and has developed a system, has been suspended, pending the princess's response to the declaration. I looked at the princess. She had not moved. Her expression had done something I couldn't interpret. It wasn't anger exactly, or not only anger. It was the expression of someone working through a problem that had just become significantly more complicated than it was 30 seconds ago. What are my options? I said. Broadly. The aide looked at the princess. The princess said something without looking at him. The princess says, the aide translated, that your options are currently her problem, not yours. That's not reassuring, I said. No, the aide agreed. It is not. They put me in a room that was either a very comfortable holding cell or a very secure guest chamber, depending on how you looked at it. The distinction seemed important, so I spent some time thinking about it, and concluded that the difference was probably whether the door locked from the outside, which I didn't check because I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The room had a window. The view was the valley where the ceremony had been happening, now empty. The 400 witnesses had dispersed with the efficient speed of people who had somewhere to be and had just witnessed something they needed to discuss privately. I watched them go and thought about the fact that somewhere out there 400 individuals were telling someone what had happened, and the story was going to get worse with every retelling, and there was nothing I could do about it. I also thought about the pre-colonial script on her bracers. I couldn't help it. It's a documented system. There are maybe 12 people in 3 systems who can read it fluently, and I'm one of them because I spent 8 months on a survey job that required understanding territorial markers, and the territorial markers turned out to be written in a script nobody had bothered to update since the colonial period. The inscription on the right bracer had been a land boundary declaration. The left one I hadn't gotten a clear look at. This is the kind of thing I think about when I'm waiting to find out if I'm going to be executed. It's not useful. It's just what my brain does. The aide came back after approximately 2 hours. His name, he told me, was Paris, and he had been assigned to manage my situation, which he said with the tone of a man who had been handed a task nobody else wanted. "The council has convened," he said. "There are 3 positions. The first is that the declaration is invalid because you are not Villain, and the ritual law does not extend to non-citizens." "That sounds good," I said. "The second is that the declaration is valid because the ritual law applies to anyone who crosses the boundary, citizen or not, which is in fact the original purpose of the law. It was written to cover exactly this kind of situation." "What situation?" "Outsiders entering sacred space," Paris said. "The original drafters apparently anticipated contact with other species. They were thorough." "And the third position?" Paris looked at me with the expression of someone who has been doing this job long enough to have stopped finding it surprising. "The third position is that the question of validity is less important than the political implications of the answer, and that the council should decide based on what is useful rather than what is technically correct." "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me today," I said. "I find honesty saves time," Paris said. "There is also a fourth factor which is not an official position but which is relevant." "Which is?" "Lord Even of House Stravath has been seeking the princess's hand for 4 years," Paris said. "His family has significant influence on the council. The presence of your declaration, regardless of its validity, provides the princess with a legal mechanism to delay the Dravath suit indefinitely while the question of your status is resolved." I sat with that for a moment. She could use my accidental proposal to avoid the proposal she doesn't want. Technically, she could not use it, Paris said carefully. You would need to formally maintain the declaration. She would then be obligated to formally consider it. The consideration process has no fixed timeline under ritual law. How long could it take? As long as the princess requires, Paris said. And then, with the slight emphasis of someone conveying a message they haven't been officially asked to convey, the princess is known for being thorough. We looked at each other. You're telling me, I said, that if I confirm the declaration, it helps her. I am explaining the legal situation, Paris said. What you do with that information is your decision. This was the moment I should have thought carefully. What I actually did was think about the way she looked when Paris had explained my situation to her, not the anger, which I'd expected, but the thing underneath it, which was the expression of someone who had just watched their options get worse and was calculating how to manage it without showing that it had gotten worse. I'd seen that expression before. I'd worn it before. It's the expression of someone who is good at handling things and has been handling things alone for a long time. I want to speak to her, I said. Paris looked at me. That is not standard procedure. I understand. I'd like to request it anyway. May I ask why? I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because I caused this and I'd like to know what she actually wants before I do anything else, I said. Not what the council wants. Not what's politically useful. What she wants. Paris was quiet for a moment. That, he said, is also not a question people usually ask. Is it a problem? No, he said, after a pause that was slightly longer than a simple no required. I don't believe it is. She came that evening. Not with guards, or not with visible guards, which I'd learned was a distinction that mattered here. She came in without ceremony, which I suspected was itself a kind of statement, and stood in the center of the room and looked at me with an expression I was getting better at reading. Still anger. Still calculation. Something else that I didn't have a name for yet. You asked to speak with me? She said. Standard dialect, not the formal register. Another statement. I wanted to ask you something directly, I said. Ask. Do you want me to confirm the declaration? She was quiet for a moment. That is a strange question. It's a yes or no question, I said. I find those save time. Something shifted in her expression, not amusement, not quite, but adjacent to it. If you confirm it, she said carefully, It creates certain complications. I know, I said. It also resolves certain complications. I know that too. And you are asking what I want, she said. Not what is useful. Not what the law requires. Yes. She looked at me for a long moment. We were talking about ritual law and political strategy. We were also talking about something else, and I think we both knew it, and neither of us said so because saying so would have changed what it was. I want, she said finally, with the careful precision of someone choosing words that will be accurate, to make my own decisions. About my own life. Without the council deciding what is useful and presenting it to me as if it were my choice. That's not a yes or no, I said. No, she agreed. It isn't. I looked at her. She looked back. I'm going to confirm the declaration, I said. For what it's worth, that's my decision. Not because it's useful. Because I walked into your ceremony and made a mess of your day, and I'd like to at least give you one thing that's actually yours to decide. She was quiet for long enough that I started wondering if I'd said something wrong. You talk to yourself, she said finally. I know. I can try to. Earlier, she said. Before. You said the limestone shouldn't be at that elevation. I blinked. You heard that. I was standing 30 meters away when you crossed the boundary, she said. You were talking to no one about limestone. I do that, I said. I'm aware it's. My geological surveyor said the same thing 6 months ago, she said. About the limestone. I had him reassigned because the council said it wasn't relevant. I stared at her. It's extremely relevant. If the limestone formation extends to the northern ridge, it means the whole eastern plateau is. I know what it means, she said. And for the first time, she looked at me like I was something other than a problem she needed to manage. The council received my formal confirmation of the declaration the next morning. Paris delivered it with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting for it, which told me he'd anticipated my decision before I'd made it, which I found either reassuring or slightly alarming depending on how I thought about it. Lord Even of House Stravath received the news approximately 2 hours later. I know the timing because Paris mentioned it, and I know he mentioned it deliberately because Paris does everything deliberately. The reaction, apparently, was not warm. I spent the morning in the guest chamber working on my survey logs. This sounds like I was very calm about everything, which is not accurate. I was extremely not calm. I was writing survey notes with the focused intensity of someone using work to avoid thinking about the fact that they had just formally declared matrimonial intent toward an alien princess who had originally been planning to execute them. The notes were very detailed. I documented 3 separate rock formations I'd already documented twice. Kaina came at midday. No announcement, no ceremony. She had changed out of the armor into something that was still formal but less so, the kind of clothing that says I am still a princess without saying asterisk I am currently performing being a princess. Asterisk the distinction was subtle and I noticed it anyway because I notice things and then comment on them, though I managed not to comment on this one out loud, which I considered a personal achievement. She sat down, which surprised me. The chair across from the desk, like this was a meeting she'd scheduled. Tell me about the limestone, she said. I looked at her. That's what you want to talk about. It's what I want to start with, she said. So I told her about the limestone. The formation I'd found on the eastern ridge was inconsistent with the surrounding geology in a way that suggested either a significant historical seismic event, or, more likely, an ancient water system that had since dried up. If the formation extended north, which the mineral gradient suggested it did, then the eastern plateau was sitting on a network of dry subsurface channels. Not dangerous in itself, but significant for construction, for agriculture, for understanding what the land had been before it was what it was now. She listened without interrupting. Most people interrupt. They ask clarifying questions at the wrong moment, or they nod too much to show they're following, or they drift, and you can see it in their eyes. She did none of these things. She listened the way people listen when they already know some of what you're saying and are triangulating the new parts against the existing knowledge. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. The northern settlement, she said. The one that was abandoned 4 generations ago. The official record says it failed due to insufficient water supply. If there were subsurface channels that dried up, I said, that would explain it. The settlers might not have known the water table was already declining when they built. My grandmother believed the official record was incomplete, she said. The council told her she was misreading the historical documentation. Was she? She was reading it correctly, Kaina said. They disagreed with her interpretation. We looked at each other. We were talking about geological history and archival documentation. We were also talking about something else, about what it means when the people around you tell you that what you see clearly isn't what's there, and whether you trust your own perception anyway. I need to survey the northern ridge to confirm, I said. I was planning to do it this week before. I gestured vaguely at the general situation. Before you accidentally proposed to me, she said. I was going to say before the situation became complicated, but yes. Something moved across her face. Not quite amusement. Close. The survey, she said. Could it be done from within the plateau boundary? Most of it. There's one formation on the outer edge that I'd need direct access to. I will arrange access, she said. And then, with the careful precision I was starting to recognize as her particular way of saying things that mattered, the council does not need to know the specific purpose of the survey. I looked at her. You want the information before they do. I want accurate information, she said. What the council does with it after is a separate question. We were talking about geological surveys and information management. We were also, I was fairly certain, talking about the fact that she'd spent a significant portion of her life having accurate information discounted by people who found it inconvenient, and that she was interested in having someone who would simply look at what was there and say what they saw. Which, for better or worse, was exactly what I did. I can start tomorrow, I said. If I'm allowed outside. You are not a prisoner, she said. The door locks from the outside, I said. A pause. That is a security measure, not a restriction. I understand the distinction, I said. I'm noting it anyway. She looked at me with the expression of someone reassessing something. You say everything you think. Not everything, I said. I've been editing significantly since yesterday. What have you edited out? I thought about the pre-colonial script on her bracers, which I still hadn't gotten a clear look at the left one. I thought about the way she'd listened to the limestone explanation. I thought about several other things I had consciously not said out loud in the last 18 hours, which was a personal record. Several observations, I said, about things that aren't relevant to the current situation. What makes you determine relevance? Whether saying it would help or just be true, I said. Sometimes things are true and saying them doesn't accomplish anything useful. She was quiet for a moment. That is a more sophisticated filter than I expected. I've had 34 years to develop it, I said. It doesn't always work. No, she said. I noticed. We sat in the room with the window overlooking the empty Ceremony Valley, and outside the light was doing something interesting with the plateau rock formations that I would normally have commented on, and I didn't comment on it, and she noticed that I didn't comment on it, and I noticed her noticing. The survey tomorrow, she said, standing. I will send Paris with the access arrangements. Thank you. She moved toward the door. Stopped. The thing you said, she said without turning around. In the valley. Before you understood what it meant. I waited. My geological surveyor, she said. The one who was reassigned. He had been working here for 11 years. He was the third person to raise the limestone question. The council told me reassigning him was the correct administrative decision. She paused. I did not agree. I was told I was misreading the situation. She left. The door closed. I sat for a moment and then said out loud, to the room, to no one. She agreed with him. She always agreed with him. They just kept telling her she didn't. The room didn't answer. It never does. But sometimes saying the thing out loud is how you know you've understood it correctly. I opened my survey logs and started planning tomorrow's route. The survey took 3 days. Kaina came on the second day. Not announced, not explained, Paris simply appeared at my camp in the morning and said the princess would be joining the survey, and I said all right, and that was the entire conversation about it. She arrived an hour later in clothes that were clearly not designed for fieldwork but had been adapted for it with the practical adjustments of someone who had done this before: sleeves rolled, unnecessary ceremonial elements removed, boots that were formal but had enough grip to be functional. She carried a small case that turned out to contain documentation tools and a copy of the historical survey records going back 4 generations, which she had apparently pulled from the archive the previous evening. I didn't ask how she'd gotten access to records the council considered closed. She didn't explain. We started walking. The thing about survey work is that it requires a specific kind of attention. You have to look at the land in sections, systematically, without letting your eye skip to the interesting parts. Most people can't do it. They see something unusual and they go toward it, and they miss the 3 things between here and there that would have told them why the unusual thing exists. I've worked with surveyors who had a decade of experience and still couldn't stop themselves from chasing the interesting thing first. Kaina did not chase the interesting thing. She moved through the sections methodically, recorded what was there before she moved to the next section, asked questions only when she'd finished recording. By mid-morning I had revised my initial assessment of her geological knowledge from informed amateur to * someone who taught herself from primary sources and had nobody to verify it against. I said out loud, not entirely to myself. You've done survey work before. Not officially, she said. Unofficially? My grandmother's records include field notes from surveys she conducted in her youth, she said. Before her official role began. I read them many times. How old were you when you started reading them? 8, she said. The council considered them informal documentation, not suitable for official archive. But you kept them. They were accurate, she said simply. Accuracy doesn't stop being accurate because someone decides it's informal. I wrote something in my survey log that was technically a notation about mineral stratification and was also, less technically, a reminder to myself that I was talking to someone who had been told her whole life that her perception of accurate things was incorrect, and had kept the accurate things anyway. We reached the northern formation at midday. The outcropping I needed direct access to was exactly what I'd expected from the gradient data. The subsurface channel network was real, extensive, and had been active within the last 2 centuries. Not ancient history. Recent enough that the people who built the northern settlement might have had living memory of water in the channels. I said this out loud. I was saying it to my survey log, but Kaina was standing 2 meters away and heard it. 2 centuries, she said. Give or take. The mineral deposit pattern suggests the channels were still partially active when I checked the historical dates I'd memorized the night before. When the settlement was established. They knew, she said. Not a question. Someone knew, I said. Whether the settlers knew, or whether someone knew and didn't tell them, I can't determine from geology. She was quiet for a moment. My grandmother's notes include a reference to a council decision made in the settlement's 3rd year. She didn't know what it concerned. The record was sealed. Sealed records in a settlement that failed due to water shortage. I said. Yes. We looked at the formation. We were talking about historical documentation and geological evidence. We were also talking about a pattern, information suppressed, decisions made by people who controlled what others were allowed to know, consequences that fell on people who hadn't been given the full picture. The record, I said. The sealed one. Is it still sealed? Yes. Can it be unsealed? By the reigning head of House Villain, she said. Or by their designated successor? I looked at her. Which you are. Which I am not yet, she said. The succession ritual was interrupted. I thought about that. By me. By you, she confirmed. The tone was neutral. Not accusatory, just accurate. I'm sorry, I said. For the interruption. Not for. I stopped. Not for what? I looked at the rock formation. Not for the declaration. Whatever it was technically. I'm not sorry I said it. She was quiet long enough that I started composing a retraction in my head. You said it about the armor, she said. I said it about all of it, I said. The armor was part of it. Another silence. No one has ever said that, she said. About all of it. That seems unlikely, I said. You're. I stopped myself. I'm what? I thought about my filter. About things that were true but didn't always need to be said. Then I thought about geological surveyors who had been reassigned for saying accurate things, and grandmothers whose field notes had been classified as informal, and sealed records, and a woman who had been told repeatedly that what she saw clearly wasn't what was there. You're the kind of person, I said carefully, that people look at and see the position. The armor, the crown, the ceremony. They see what you represent, and they respond to that. Nobody looks at the limestone. She turned to look at me. Her expression was doing something I hadn't seen before, not the calculation, not the careful precision. Something that had less control in it. The limestone, she said. The thing that's actually interesting, I said. The thing that's wrong for the latitude. The thing everyone walks past because they're looking at something else. A long silence. The wind moved across the plateau and did something interesting with the sound of it through the channel openings in the rock, a lone note that my survey log was going to have a hard time capturing accurately. I said out loud, not entirely intentionally. That's a significant acoustic phenomenon. The channels are acting as a resonance system. I've never seen that in a dry formation. I heard her exhale, short, surprised. Not a laugh exactly. The beginning of one stopped. You're doing it again, she said. I know, I said. I told you the filter doesn't always work. Don't fix it, she said. I looked at her. She was looking at the rock formation, not at me, and her expression had settled into something I hadn't seen on her before. Relaxed wasn't the right word, but something in that direction. Like a calculation that had been running continuously had paused. The acoustic phenomenon, she said. Is it in your survey log? It is now, I said. Good, she said. My grandmother mentioned an unusual sound from the northern plateau in her field notes. The council told her it was wind interference and not worth documenting. It's worth documenting, I said. Yes, she said. I know. We stood on the plateau for another hour. She asked questions and I answered them, and I asked questions and she answered them, and at some point we stopped being a surveyor and a princess and became two people looking at the same thing and seeing it the same way, which is rarer than it sounds, and I noticed it happening and said nothing about it, which was the correct decision. On the way back to the settlement she said, without preamble, Lord Even has formally challenged the declaration. I know, I said. Paris told me. He has requested a ritual contest of knowledge. Under the law it cannot be refused. I know that too. You are not Verlaine, she said. The knowledge required. I've been surveying this planet for 6 weeks. I said. I know the Eastern Plateau better than anyone currently alive. I know the pre-colonial script on your bracers, and I just spent 2 days learning your historical survey records from your grandmother's field notes. I paused. What's the left bracer say? I never got a clear look. She stopped walking. Turned to look at me. It's a territorial claim, she said. Pre-colonial. It translates approximately as, * this land knows who tends it. *. I thought about that. Your grandmother's armor. Yes. She surveyed this land herself. I said. And then she wore the record of it. Kinda looked at me for a long moment. The contest, she said? You are not concerned. I'm extremely concerned, I said. I'm just also fairly confident. Those are different things. Yes, I said. They are. The contest was scheduled for 4 days after the formal challenge. This gave me 4 days to prepare, which sounds like enough time until you consider that I was preparing to demonstrate knowledge of Valain tradition, law, and planetary history in a formal ritual context against a man who had been born here, raised here, and had spent 4 years specifically cultivating the connections that would make him a credible candidate for the succession. I spent the first day reading. Paris brought me everything I asked for and some things I hadn't asked for but which he apparently judged relevant, which I was starting to understand was his particular form of help, indirect, plausible, technically just doing his job. The second day kinda came. She didn't announce it as a teaching session. She arrived in the evening with a small stack of documents and sat down across from me and started talking about the succession history of House Valain going back 6 generations, and I listened and asked questions, and she answered them and then asked me questions back to check what I'd retained, and we did this for 3 hours without either of us explicitly naming what we were doing. It was, functionally, the best preparation session I've ever had for anything. She knew exactly which details were load-bearing, the ones that would come up in the contest, the ones that had legal implications, the ones that connected to other things in non-obvious ways. She taught the way people teach when they've had to learn something themselves with no one to guide them and have developed a very clear map of where the difficult parts are. I said at one point, "You prepared for this yourself." "I prepare for everything," she said. "No, I mean you prepared for this specific situation. The contest. You've been thinking about the knowledge required and where the gaps are." She looked at me. "You are the one being contested." "I know," I said. "You're helping me anyway." A pause. "You caused this situation." "Yes," I said. "And you're helping me anyway." We were talking about contest preparation and responsibility. We were also talking about the fact that she had every reason to let me fail. It would resolve the declaration, remove the complication, return things to whatever normal had been before I walked into her ceremony. She was helping me instead. Neither of us said anything about why. "The third challenge in the contest," she said, returning to the documents, "concerns the boundary laws. The original text, not the modernized version." "The modernized version stripped the protection clauses," I said. "The ones that covered non-citizens." She looked up. "You found that?" "Yesterday." The original drafters were thorough, like Paris said. They anticipated contact with other species. The modernized version removed the anticipation. "The Council approved the modernization 40 years ago," she said. "My grandmother opposed it." "I know," I said. I found her dissenting record in the archive. Paris helped me locate it. Something moved across her face, a flicker of something that might have been gratitude toward Paris, quickly contained. "He is thorough," she said. "He's loyal to you," I said. "Not to the Council." The flicker again. "That is a significant observation." "It's an obvious one," I said. "He's been giving me exactly the information I need to not embarrass you. That's not neutral administrative assistance." She looked at the documents in front of her for a moment. "He has been with my household since I was 12, she said. "He was my grandmother's aide before that. He brought me her field notes," I said. "On the second day. Without being asked?" Kaina was quiet. I had the impression she hadn't known this. "The contest," she said, returning to it with the deliberate focus of someone setting something aside to think about later. "Lord Even will have prepared thoroughly. His family has 4 years of investment in this outcome." "What's he like?" I said. She considered the question with the seriousness it apparently deserved. "Intelligent," she said. "Strategic. He understands the political structure well. He would manage the succession competently." "That's not what I asked?" Another pause. "He looks at me the way the Council looks at me," she said. As a position. A function. Something to be managed well. We were talking about Lord Even's qualifications. We were talking about something else. Does he know about the limestone? I said. No. Does he know about your grandmother's field notes? No. Does he know the original boundary law had protection clauses for non-citizens? He knows the modernized version, she said. Which does not. I thought about a man who had spent 4 years preparing to win something without ever asking what was actually there. I thought about geological surveys and sealed records and a woman who had been told repeatedly that what she saw clearly wasn't there. He's going to lose, I said. You are confident, she said. I'm confident about the knowledge portion, I said. I'm extremely not confident about the ritual components. I don't know the ceremonial forms, I'm going to mispronounce things, and there are probably protocols I don't know exist. The ritual components are scored on participation, not precision, she said. For non-citizens. That's a significant detail Paris didn't mention. I'm mentioning it now. I looked at her. She looked back at her documents. Thank you, I said. I am explaining the rules of a contest that affects my succession, she said. It is practical. Yes, I said. It is. The third day she didn't come, which I noticed in the specific way of noticing an absence that you hadn't admitted to expecting. I read, prepared, talked to myself about geology and boundary law and pre-colonial script, and tried not to count the hours until the contest in a way that would make me more nervous rather than less. Paris came in the evening. He brought food and, without comment, a copy of Lord Even's previous public addresses on succession matters. I looked at the documents. These are his positions. They are publicly available, Paris said. His family released them as part of their campaign for the suit. They're 4 years old, I said. He prepared based on what the succession looked like 4 years ago. Yes, Paris said. A lot has been surveyed in 6 weeks that wasn't surveyed 4 years ago. That is also accurate, Paris said. And then, after a pause, the princess asked me to tell you that the contest begins at the 3rd hour after sunrise. She could have sent a message. She asked me to tell you, Paris said, with a slight emphasis on the telling, that she has reviewed your survey maps of the Eastern Plateau and has added 3 corrections based on her grandmother's field notes, which she has left on your desk. I looked at the desk. There was a document there I hadn't noticed, with annotations in a precise and careful hand. She corrected my survey maps, I said. She supplemented them, Paris said, with historical data. I picked up the document. The corrections were small, precise, and exactly right. I could see it immediately. The places where my 6 weeks of current observation met 4 generations of historical record and produced something more complete than either alone. I said out loud to the room. She's been working on these since yesterday. I wouldn't know, Paris said in the tone of someone who knew exactly. I looked at the annotations for a long time. She had written in the margin of one section, in the pre-colonial script, not the formal territorial language of the bracers, but the informal notation system her grandmother had used in the field notes. I could read it. It said approximately, * the land remembers what the records forgot. *. I sat with that for a while. Then I said out loud, I'm going to win tomorrow. Paris gathered the food tray. I will ensure you are called at the appropriate time, he said. Paris, I said. He stopped. She's going to be all right, I said. Whatever happens tomorrow. She's been doing this alone for a long time and she's still standing. She's going to be all right. Paris looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time for a specific thing to happen and has just seen the beginning of it. Yes, he said. I believe she will. I won the contest. Not cleanly. I mispronounced 2 ceremonial phrases and skipped a ritual gesture that Paris had to quietly mime from the side of the hall so I could correct it mid-sequence. Lord Even was technically precise in every form. He knew every protocol, every pronunciation, every gesture in the correct order. He did not know about the protection clauses in the original boundary law. When I cited the original text, the pre-colonial version, not the modernized one, and demonstrated that my presence at the ceremony had been legally protected rather than legally prohibited, the hall went quiet in a way that was different from the first silence I'd experienced here. That one had been shock. This one was something being understood for the first time. The sealed record was the final question. I didn't know what was in it. I said so. Then I said that the pattern of evidence, the limestone, the subsurface channels, the timing of the settlement's failure, the council decision made in its third year, suggested that someone had known the water table was declining before the settlement was established, and that the sealing of the record was consistent with concealing that knowledge. I cited Kaina's grandmother's field notes as my source. The council could not rule against their own archive. Lord even left without speaking. His family's investment in 4 years of preparation had encountered something it hadn't prepared for, which was accurate information in the hands of someone willing to say it out loud. Afterward, in the corridor, Kaina found me. The limestone, she said, was worth documenting, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Outside, somewhere on the eastern plateau, wind was moving through dry channels that had once carried water, making the low sound I'd noted in my survey log and that her grandmother had heard decades before me and been told wasn't worth recording. You're still talking to yourself, she said. I said that out loud? You said the channels are still doing the thing? They are, I said. It's a significant acoustic. Don't stop, she said. I looked at her. The talking, she said. Don't stop. I didn't have an answer for that. For possibly the first time since I was 9 years old, I had nothing to say. She smiled. It was the first time.